really on Mount Everest. You can be virtually in Jurassic Park. You can be really, but not really inside chemical molecule.
Yes, virtually. Yes, that's a great way of describing it. So how many people here have had a virtual reality experience before? Okay.
Stick around.
Stick around. So the way, historically, if you think about it, there's actually a very prominent computer scientist, Paul Milgrom. I think he's at the University of Toronto now, and he has something called the reality spectrum. So on one end of that, you have virtual reality, which deals with computer-generated background. So the way I always explain, what's the difference between VR, AR, and XR is something as simple as it's the background. And more specifically, in technical terms, in Unity, we will call that the scene. So in VR, the background is computer-generated. That scene was actually developed by game developers. In augmented reality, the background, the scene, is actually the real world. So you have virtual objects. So for example, if Dasani had an AR object that looked like their Dasani water bottle, it would actually sit here on the table. So that's what augmented reality is. And some of you you probably encounter it every single day. You probably use filters on Snapchat. If you use Amazon, any of their shopping experiences now, you can use the camera and place objects inside of your house. So that's the way I think about augmented reality.
Thanks. Give me the hard one. I had to go get my, this is the hashtag VR Yeti. Show, and I think we customized this ourselves. It's a nice segue actually, because technology should be human friendly. And we really think that personalizing your technology, and making it a part of you helps people get over some of the initial confusion about some of these terms in VR. So I'll try to address that. There are a lot of semantic word games going on in VR right now. What happened is that really 360 video came out first and was sort of called VR by the media, and it stuck. And then VR kind of stuck. And a lot of us in the industry are trying to, I think, maybe unsuccessfully, but I think the attempt is through XR to have a term that really can encompass the entire VR umbrella. So all of the various technologies that are related to VR, that are some sort of virtual augmented scenario, fantasy world, digital overlay is what I call AR, over reality. And some people call it extended reality. I prefer to think of it as X as just a variable that you put in front of whatever reality you're extending into.
Thank you, that was very helpful. So there are some people who may think that VR is actually a mechanism that detaches people because you're behind a computer, you're behind a headset. But Hall at Discovery, I know that you do a lot of projects with educators from K to 12. And so I was wondering if you could talk about these projects and how you see them as actually building community and empathy rather than detaching students. And then if anyone else wanted to talk about similar projects they're working on.
Yeah, I'll say what we're doing, and I think that's one of the real powers of virtual reality. It's not what you hear about very much, but we're in the education space. We're kindergarten through 12th grade. And for us, it's a lot of times the story of the power you bring to an individual. So there are a lot of stories about how people have seminal moments that sets their career. I bet most people in this room had a moment they can go back to and say, you know what, I decided to go into what I'm doing now because of a thing that happened when, or this person, that stuff. So I'd like to tell the story of Ray Montaigne, who was the first African-American woman to run a computer department in the Navy. She died last year at 83. And she knew that she wanted to be an engineer when she was 7 years old and was visiting her grandfather. They lived in Arkansas, took her to tour a captured German submarine back then. You know this story. And she saw the dials, she looked at the periscope, she said, what do I have to do to know how to do all this stuff? She's 7 years old. She's in Arkansas. And I said, well, you have to be an engineer. You don't have to worry about that. You have to be an engineer. And she said, I'm going to be an engineer. And she became an engineer. By the time she retired, she was briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She was building programs for Richard Nixon. She was doing great stuff. That's one. Terry Bradshaw was a quarterback. His moment when he was 7 years old, walked by a Sears store, and there was a football and a helmet. That's the first time he'd ever seen either one. And he decided that's what he wanted. Don't ask me why. But then he'd get the football, he'd throw it in the air, and go pick it up and throw it back. And there are lots of stories like this where somebody was in the place that made a difference in their lives. And if you are in a community or you're stuck in a neighborhood and you don't ever get out, you're not exposed to those things. And I was a math teacher in Hollywood, and we had kids that never went to the beach. We lived in LA, they'd never go, we'd take them on a field trip to the ocean, right? Well, if that's true, and if Ray Montague never goes inside that German submarine, or Terry Bradshaw never sees that football, their lives are different. With this, we really, and this is sort of the game changer, the high quality VR. They're now under $200. They're accessible. You see a lot of these in schools. It means that I can take you someplace and maybe change the way you think about farming or mining or the military or about being a pilot. And it's an experience that makes a big difference. And if you can start at 7 and go through 12, the people who've never heard of symphony. Heard this story in NPR last week. Woman walks in, she's in college, never heard of symphony before, sees it, changed their life. She's now the assistant conductor in San Francisco. $2,000 a year, she has another job. That's it's one of those things where if only we expose everybody to it. So that's part of the deal. It's finding a way that it will really work. The other thing you can do, and I'm sure you will be talking about this, is when you talk about empathy, we were trying to put together a video, it's not done yet, but where you put this on and I can walk you through the world of a child that's dyslexic. I can make sure that every book you see is colored in such a way that makes it very, very hard to read. You can concentrate really hard and you can do it, but to walk around like that and to let teachers take that experience, you only have to be in there about 7 minutes. Be able to have another child look in there, you're only talking about 7 minutes, maybe less. Then you built empathy, you change, you can see other people, walk under people's shoes, and to me that is a really huge part.
Can I push back against that a little
Sure.
bit? I love what you said, but I think empathy is something that is a really difficult thing to talk about with VR. And the reason being, especially to folks who have had situations that we may not be able to understand or put on a device and instantly understand, I think it may be a misstep for us in VR to call it empathy. And that's why I try to reframe my own thinking around this, and I'm still playing with this idea of, is it empathy or are we really teaching compassion because people are having a lived experience in VR that is simulating a real life experience? Because you're not actually having the same experience as the other person. You're able to have some level of compassion and you're able to understand what it might be like to be in their shoes. But I don't think you actually come out of VR and go, oh, I totally know what it's like to be this person. But I do think it enables us to put people in this embodied cognitive place where they're able to have an experience of the other, of whatever the other is, and they're able to think about maybe their own transformative experience that they had inside of VR, or how that might be an experience that has happened to someone else. So I mean, sometimes I worry about that empathy word sometimes. I think it can be difficult in different communities that we serve to use the word empathy can sometimes feel like the wrong word.
Well, let me just kind of respond to that. So, and I'll take, cognitive display, I'll take that. Cognitive reality, I'll take that other thing. But I know that there was a fundraiser where we're trying to raise water for a place in a different space, and people put on headsets and followed one girl's, it was her job to go down and get water, and how long it took, an hour and a half to take to get one jar of water. She had to do it about 7 times a day. So once you sit in that and you spend an hour and you realize, oh my gosh, this is for a glass of water, then it does change your thinking. So you're right, it's not going to change the way you think space.
But I love what you were saying about the kind of the experience that people haven't had before, because one of my colleagues that runs VR Nation, a nonprofit, Alexander, talks about it as attaining the unattainable, which I think helps people also expand their imagination. It helps them think about what might be possible for themselves. And that is something that both traditional media and news media work that we do, and work that we do in underrepresented communities, making sure they have a voice or providing them opportunities to have a voice. I think we can do that same work in VR, but in an embodied cognitive opportunity where people can sit inside of an experience like the one you're describing and have a sense of what it might feel like. And then to actually, when they take the headset off, I think the key is having something we ask them to do right after that experience, so that we can really use that opportunity as a teachable moment, as an education opportunity, as an opportunity to go one step further than VR can do.
Okay. I think there's another point there, which is the limitations you have with, I think VR has received this unwelcome and unassuming, responsibility to teach empathy now as a technology. So for example, I mean, they're just technological challenges that you have with even teaching empathy, right? So for example, you know, if you put on a headset, to your question about detachment, you know, I always say like, being in VR, you're no more detached than you are when most of us walk around with our smartphones. To be quite honest with you, because I can be completely locked into my HTC Vive and have a very normal experience and disregard everything else happening in the world. And I'll do the same thing walking down the street with my iPhone. So the detachment issue isn't really a concern. I think the concern is that how do we build as technologists, how do we build a sense of presence in VR? Like that's the true technological challenge. And oftentimes we can't do that right now because there are still areas of human-computer interaction. For example, how do I truly smell in VR? So I'll never know what it's like to be a chef if I can't smell the cuisine I'm actually using. You know, what does it actually feel like to, you know, be a person of color and, you know, unfortunately have the police tackle you? Well, you can't really feel yet in VR. So even there are limitations to teaching empathy that we hope will be solved with new areas of human-computer interaction over the next few years.
Thank you, that's really interesting. So I'm wondering if there are current hurdles for people to access VR. So whether that be education about the technology or the neighborhood you live in or affordability. And if there are hurdles, if you could talk about them and ways that we can combat them.
Sure. So this is predominantly what we do. We provide access to anyone in our community can come in and use about 8 different tools that we have. We teach 7 different classes on VR content creation. We help people, support people when those tools go away because the startup that started them just went poof. And then we provide ongoing opportunities to build community around VR technologies. So we had a VR Eco Hackathon a couple of years ago. It was the first ever in Boston. And out of that, we had about 40% persons of color versus 60% white folks. And I think it was about 60-40 male-female too, which was kind of huge in 2017 actually. And I actually think that there's a huge space inside of the VR field right now. It's really nascent. I keep saying that for the last 4 years, but it's still really, really nascent. We are building a brand new technology and it's a paradigm shift. A lot of people will talk about it like it's just a new media tool. It's not. It's a whole shift, and it's a 3D spatial computing shift, which is not how we see things right now. And that's gonna really shift everything. It's gonna shift how we consume media, how we create media. And so some of the biggest obstacles we saw early on was that people never tried VR, and if they had, they tried it with the Google Cardboard and they had a horrible experience. They never wanted to do it again, or it made them nauseous, and that's what happened to me. And then I saw the Syrian Davos piece from the United Nations, which was an amazing piece that showed a young woman, 12 years old, in a Syrian refugee camp. She was Syrian, but she's in a French refugee camp, and I took the headset off and I was in tears, and I had no idea I was going to be moved so. But it was because that sense of presence was so strong. But I didn't have access to an HTC Vive or an Oculus Rift at that time. I just happened to go to a conference. So we're still, even 4 years now that we've been doing this work, we're still finding that a large percentage of the population has not had access to VR, and if they have, it's been a bad experience. And we are trying to spread that across the country by working with arts and cultural organizations to help them. We train the trainers, we teach them how to fish. We don't want to be the vendor. We want them to be empowered or have the power to create programs on their own and be able to bring VR to their community. So we think that that should be publicly accessible, just like the PortaPack was back 35 years ago. When my predecessors, the PortaPack was the first publicly accessible video camera that was huge, and regular average people didn't have access to that, and public access television made that accessible so that citizens could go out and document stories that were happening in their community, and then actually held their government officials accountable because they were able to report local, hyper-local way on some of these stories. And I think we're really trying to do that in the VR AR space, and we have about 15 centers around the country that have taken that on and have started expanding their mission into that VR AR space. But we can only reach so many. So, I think the other obstacle is that philanthropists aren't giving yet to VR because the technology is still really new. Just in Boston, in that ecosystem, the last 2 months, we've seen one foundation just get started. And we're very excited. We have a VR AR scholarship fund. It's the first in the world, I think, and definitely in the country, that we're going to be providing to four-year college students in higher education so that they can start getting these skills early on, that we're building in our job training program. And that's a challenge too, because philanthropists aren't giving money to those programs because they don't really understand VR yet. So I have to take this headset to Sundance and stand in line and talk to people about what VR is, how you can use it, how it's going to change the world, get them to maybe believe me a little bit, and then see if we can get funding. But that funding trail right now is not following where we need the resources, which is at the grassroots level, to be able to really help support people who do not have access to a lab at MIT and Humanity now, so that they can start creating and playing and practicing and making mistakes just like we did in traditional media and in the tech world when the tech world started to boom.
Those are some great points, and one that I always kind of sit with is, I mean, to be quite honest with you, VR is a 1% technology. It is designed and made for the 1%. So far. And it probably will stay that way, just giving, the cost of displays to actually put in the HMD, head-mounted display is the actual headset, that's the HMD. So they probably will stay costly, but I think discussing affordability without discussing usability is just as important. And I think that there is, in my opinion, there are really just two active groups in virtual reality right now. You have the enterprise group that use virtual reality for things such as training, staff. I think UPS, Walmart are leading the way there. And then the other community, which most of our users at Drop come from, are from the gaming community. And for individuals like that, there aren't any hurdles because they've already moved to the next paradigm of computing. Our average user spends about 25 hours a week inside of his, and I say his because most of our users are predominantly white males, inside of this headset. And once again, because of that, there aren't any hurdles for him. It's like, no, I can actually go forward to pre-order the new Oculus Quest that will be released rather soon. But typically affordability and usability, I think they aren't as mutually exclusive as people think they are. Because I've yet to meet someone like obviously a normal individual, right? To say like, oh, I want to go back into a VR experience. Because I can't move throughout the day without my phone, but you can move throughout the day without your VR headset for most people. So yeah.
I was just follow up and say one of the work that Russell's doing is really important because they're working in the browser space. Once that becomes out there where you can, now you go to a website, see all this great stuff, you can go there and see that website in VR. That's a pretty powerful thing. In terms of accessibility and barriers, it's interesting because money is not so much the barrier anymore. It used to be to have the kind of experience that you had, that kind of made you cry, vote for everything, but that made you cry, was really $2,000. I mean, whereas what it was, and that's not going to get into many classrooms. And it's tethered and it was awkward. The Oculus Go, and that's what we both have up here. These are under $200. That's now in a donors choose model for a classroom teacher. So these are starting to bring meaningful experiences sort of closer. You can always get these. This was weird. The first session today was on 3D printing. You could 3D print these little guys, and you can have them. And it's not the powerful experience as you said you can have, but it's pretty good. What you need for all of these things, though, for this and for these, is internet connectivity. And I've got stuff I've downloaded here, and we were playing with it earlier. You can see the California wildfires. You can actually go out in space and visit a particle collider. That's because I downloaded it at a good pipe. If we're going to do this at schools, if I'm going to be able to have this and be able to check it out, so you're going to go home and have your submarine experience, wherever it's going to be, you got to have bandwidth at home, and that's important. These things, the lower price headsets, all work with cell phone. How many of you have a cell phone? There you go. So if you're going to download a VR experience, though, you're going to need a pipe that'll let you do without killing your data plan, right? You've got to have open Wi-Fi to be able to do that. And once open Wi-Fi happens, then we've got that whole new level of creator, like you said. So this is a VR camera. So all day I've been making video pictures of this. Getting this through security was interesting, by the way. What is this? I said, it's a VR, and they explained, he said, what time is the panel? So if the security guards are coming in, I think it's a very good sign. But with this, I could, and these are under $200 too, I could show the experience of moving from this panel to where we had to have lunch, right? Because the school kids were filling up the cafeteria, so we had to keep walking. But I can demonstrate this and use a free tool from Google. Thank you, Google, for sponsoring this. Stitch it all together, and you can walk in my shoes to have lunch. Or a kid can use this and show how it goes, go from their front door to the school where they attend, or what their cafeteria is like, and I can stitch all those together with free tools. So the money's not so much the issue anymore, it's not the barrier, but you've got to have the bandwidth, and the bandwidth has to be there for everybody, and everybody has to be able to access it the same way.
I do want to say you can actually watch all of your content offline. So you do have to
That's
download it,
right.
but you can watch it offline. We took 3 HTC Vives to Nairobi, Kenya to do a project with the United Nations on a 3-dimensional globe where we put all of the particulate matter for 35 years, mapped it onto the globe, and then showed world leaders how you could use VR to tell stories in a 3-dimensional way. And even though we didn't have these at the time, and I would have rather taken these than the 50 pounds and trying to get it through customs that the other HTC Vives were. It's still, I have to say, I really do think that having a full system that allows you volumetric VR, which this does, but having a full Oculus Rift, well, and Quest now, I guess, too, that just came out this week, and the HTC Vive, having a 15 by 15 foot space, when I go to the senior center and do demos for seniors, and they can throw sticks for a robot dog and have him jump up and rub his belly and have him jump for sticks, I have to watch out that they don't run through the brick wall in my building. Because it is so real, but it's also physical. We did a Parks and Recreation class on fitness inside of the HTC Vive. You can't really do that with this. So I do want to just differentiate that there are many different headsets. We could do 2 hours on all of the different technologies and, you know, do you make something in 360? Do you make something in Unity or Unreal or A-Frame, which works on the web in a web browser and is a really accessible, free, open source solution by Mozilla? There's so many different ways that you can create VR content, and I think that's one of the challenges, just to get back to your question around accessibility, is also the fact that we're so young as an industry that we don't have standards. There's very little standards around cameras. There's very little standards. There was only 3 years ago an editing program, you know, Premiere took on editing in 360 even. There are new programs coming out every day that will allow you to do things easier and easier. We haven't quite found the Dreamweaver of VR yet, but we're getting there.
So you guys teed up my next question nicely, because Paul, you talked about broadband access, and in public knowledge we hear a lot about making sure that every neighborhood and everyone has access to broadband, high-speed quality broadband. But so you said that that's really important for VR, but you also said that you need to, sometimes you can download things without having an internet connection.
If you're going to do, a good example of this, and the best example I can think of for bandwidth is Google Earth. Google Earth and VR, Google VR, which won't work on these little ones, it only works on the big ones. If you have a good pipe, and I have a pretty good pipe in my house, but I still hardwired for that, you can look around, and this is where you can like fly over Paris if you want. Go down to the street view and look around, take a little walk. If you're waiting for the image to load, it's kind of like that old movie Inception, right? Where the building's slowly put together. But if you're on good bandwidth, you can really explore lots of different things in that headset. It's got to be the good one, but without bandwidth, Google Earth, which is really somewhere out right now, really won't do it. So there's a lot of stuff I downloaded, but a lot of
Right, and there are a lot of policymakers in the room, and so I'm curious if you want to talk about why broadband access is important and if there should be policies, what they should look like to increase access and deployment.
Yes, so this is